Okay, welcome to the 2020 to 2021 Fantasy Baseball off-season. Congratulations to the LA Dodgers on their World Series victory. And now that the season is officially over, it's time to start preparing. Yes, I know 4 or 5 months in advance for the 2021 Fantasy Baseball Draft. Uh, so I did a series of videos last year where I went through some rankings, but I figure we might as well start a little earlier. I do a lot of my rankings initially based on statistics, and we have all of the stats from the 2020 season, and they're not going to change, so we can go ahead and get started now with making our customized rankings. Um, and then later on, once we have our list, we can kind of move it around slightly based on off-season moves or injuries, any kind of news updates. But I do like having the bulk of my rankings based on the player's stats and using stats specifically that are going to be predictive of future performance. So what I'd like to do, we're going to start with hitter rankings, and I'd like to do a video where we kind of breeze through some of the more advanced statistics that might not show up on the back of a player's baseball card. You may or may not be familiar with these, but I'd like to go through some of them. And then in future videos, we'll kind of go through, similar to how I did last year, kind of head to head with each hitter and work our way down until we have a ranking. I don't know what our goal is going to be, maybe top 150 hitters, something like that, along with some deep dive hitters that we'll come up with. So a couple of rules that I'd like to say is through these videos, as I'm making my customized rankings, there are some rules that I'd like to throw out for you. One is that make sure you're using my videos if you find value in them to watch to kind of see how I do my process, and if you can take some things away for your own personal rankings, that's great. Make sure when you're making your rankings that it's based on your league settings. For example, my primary league is an OPS league, on base plus slugging percentage league. If you play in a batting average league as one of your categories, you may value hitters differently than I do. I may take someone with a little extra power, lower batting average, because their OPS is probably going to be better than someone, you may value somebody who, or may want to value someone with a higher batting average and maybe not as many counting stats, just depending on the situation. So make sure you're looking at stats that are going to help you in your personal league with your team. Another thing that is very important to keep in mind that's going to be a common theme is that there is no one statistic that's going to be very telling for any player. You need to look at these stats in conjunction with all of the other stats to get a full picture of each player's hitting and pitching profile. You kind of got to look at it as a whole picture and synthesize all the data and make an opinion based on all of that. And that's going to be another theme that we go through. So just real quick, I can show you through my spreadsheet here, which has all the stats. So this is what I call the positional hitter stats, where we can kind of filter by position, by stat year. And then this is going to be Fangraphs and Baseball Savant StatCast stats that we can go through. And then these tables you can filter through them to kind of find new players. We'll use this sheet a lot in future videos. Compare stats where we can have up to 4 years of stats for any given category, so we can kind of see trends of players, and then an individual player page where we can look back to the past 10 years of the player's stats. So we'll get through more of this in later videos. In this video, I'd like to kind of focus on maybe some of the offensive statistic categories and do a quick introduction, like I said, into some of the more advanced stats. So Fangraphs has this great glossary page So we can kind of just click on this and open that up. So my main sites are going to be Fangraphs and Baseball Savant as far as stats, and we'll kind of bounce back and forth and look through them together. So what I'd like to do is quickly go through this list and kind of talk about highlights, pros and cons of each of these stats that we're going to look at. So we'll start with on base percentage. This is something that likely you're familiar with. So, basically the way that they calculate it is the times that they get on base. So these are, the ways you can get on base divided by opportunities to get on base. So, basically this is what Fangraphs and what we know of as the Moneyball stat. Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill saying, here it is, yeah, get on base, get on base. That's what is important. So, rule of thumb, you kind of, with time, you'll get a sense of what good values are for each of these stats. So this is kind of like, rule of thumb. There you go. That's what's good. That's what's great. Average. Okay. So what I really like about the Fangraphs glossary is that they have a context and then they have things to remember, which are very, very important points. So they state that on base percentage is more accurate than batting average and offensive value because you're taking into account the walks, which are important. They're getting on base. One thing to remember though is that on base percentage values a walk the same as a home run. So maybe it's not the best single statistic for a player's offensive value because someone who walks 4 times in a game is going to have the same value as someone who hits 4 home runs, and I'm not sure if that's actually reflective of the value there. Another thing that you'll see with a lot of these stats, which is important to look at, is on base percentage. You got to make sure you have a good sample size. It's not going to stabilize and predict future performance until what Fangraphs is saying about 500 plate appearances. So this is important. So, for example, you got Randy Arozarena, who was a postseason superstar this year. So if we go ahead and pull up some of his stats, he's got a pretty good prospect score here on Fangraphs. 55 future value is actually very, very good, above average for sure. But if you look at his plate appearances, he only has 99 total plate appearances in the major leagues. His on-base percentage of 384. That's fantastic. Based on this chart, he's great to excellent. But we can't quite yet say that we can't be confident going forward he's going to maintain that that high of an on-base percentage. We're just going to need more time, probably another full season of stats before we can really, really be confident with those numbers for him. But things that are in his favor is that he's got good prospect numbers. That helps. It's not always completely predictive. So yeah, that's just one thing to keep in mind. Making sure you got a good sample size. Okay, and we kind of already talked about that. So that's on base percentage. And again, if you play in an on base percentage fantasy league, this is going to be very important for you to be looking at. OPS league, on base percentage is also important because that's part of the OPS, which we're going to talk about now. And then for batting average league, you may not value walks as much. So you make sure you're keeping all of that in mind. Now, OPS, exactly like we said, it's on base percentage plus slugging percentage. So OPS, it's going to be better than on base percentage because it's not going to value home run the same as a walk. It's going to give extra value to the home run, as you can see here. Home run is worth 4 times as much as a single and a walk. So how to use it. So basically, we can kind of look at context. So I do play in an OPS league, and honestly, when I filter through players, initially when I'm kind of scouting through them, I make my minimum OPS 800. We can kind of look at last year, all hitters. We look, pull up OPS. So if we want to filter this, I really do 800 minimum, but if let's say we want to do 850, which is like great to excellent type. So you can kind of see as far as 850, you still have a ton of players that are going to fit into that category. You can scout a whole team out of 850 plus. So when you're looking at the rule of thumb rating, you know, if you play in an OPS league, I really would not settle for anything over 710 as far as an average OPS, even above average. I think that there are enough players out there who are hitting, mid 800s to higher OPS. You can really target to have most of your players on your team hitting those things. And maybe if you have a couple that are lower, but they're speed guys, going to help with stolen bases, something like that, I think that that's worth it. But just keep in mind that there's a lot of players here who are going to have even 850 and above OPS. So really, if you're looking for that, I think you'll be able to find it. So some things to remember. So like I said, it is better metric than batting average because it's gonna differentiate home runs. Those are going to be more valuable than singles. But make sure you're using in conjunction with other statistics to get a full profile for the players. That's very important. Now, if you have a choice, we're going to talk about this next. There's a weighted on-base average instead of OPS. OPS weighs both on-base and slugging the same, while WOBA accounts for the fact that on-base percentage is actually more valuable. So it's going to put extra weight on the on-base percentage of OPS. Now, OPS plus, which I kind of skipped over, we'll go back and talk about it, is better than straight OPS, especially because it's going to adjust for park and league effects. So anytime you see a stat that is a plus, OPS plus, basically it's going to, like I said, it standardizes it, and where 100 is league average, and if you're 10 points above it, that means your OPS was 10% above league average. They do that with a lot of stats that we'll talk about. So basically for that, I would filter for like 110 and above. That way they're at least 10% above average as far as OPS is concerned. Okay, but we can move on. So WOBA, we just kind of talked about WOBA a little bit. So very complicated. They got a lot of little coefficients here in their equation, but you can see, yeah, it weighs more on the on-base percentage aspect of it. So why WOBA? So like I said, it's actually considered to be one of the best tools if you want to use a single stat for players' offensive performance. So we can just read through the things to remember, okay? The following aspects of hitting. It accounts for unintentional walks, hit by pitches, singles, doubles, triples, home runs. Stolen bases and caught stealing used to be included in Fangraph stats, but now they don't. So they have these new stats that we'll briefly talk about as far as their base running value. I think this is ultimate base running, and this is weight of stolen bases. So WOBA only accounts for production at the plate, not for base running. So remember that. Okay. But WOBA is not adjusted for park effects. So players in hitter-friendly parks have slightly inflated WOBAs. So that's something to consider. But what I love about this is that Baseball Savant has expected batting statistics, and one of those is their expected WOBA, which I'd assume would be a little more standardized. So you can see if you just filter by WOBA, you're gonna get a list of players that are superstars in the league. Okay, and something cool that you can kind of do is kind of look through Baseball Savant or on Fangraphs, look through their list, and you can kind of see names like, oh, Jose Iglesias. You know, he's not really known to be like a superstar hitter, right? But he's hitting a 370 WOBA. That's top 25 in the league last year. So you'll find little surprises like that. Um, so that's why I like kind of looking through some of these lists, and you can say, oh, well, I want to make a note of him, and we'll look him up later. But also make sure you're looking at sample sizes, right? Okay. And since this is such an important stat, I would like to look at Fangraphs too to see if they have any differences. So if we filter by WOBA, yeah, so you're going to get some of the best hitters in the league are going to be there. Okay, so we can move on. So WOBA, obviously a very important stat. Okay. Weighted runs created and weighted runs created plus. This is something that I like to use a lot when filtering for players. Um, so especially the weighted run plus, where it's going to be league average of 100, and it's just easier to look at, I think. So we can kind of skip down to, yeah, so average, above average, great, excellent, okay. So if you're thinking that of using OPS plus like we talked about, um, they recommend using weighted runs created plus instead because it's based on WOBA, and WOBA is considered to be a more accurate depiction of offensive value. Okay, and know that weighted runs created plus is park and league adjusted, but neither adjust for position. Okay, that's fine. So really, it's going to tell you, give you a good indication of their offensive value. So if we just kind of organize it by weighted runs created plus, now 200 is an insane number, and I know it's a shortened season, like a third, a fourth of a season, but you're gonna again get the superstar. So if you filter by weighted runs created plus, you filter by WOBA, you're not really gonna go wrong with hitters, okay? But you really should look at the full story there. Now, I do want to point out one player that I saw a few days ago. Dodgers. What was his name? He played a bit this past year. Yeah, this guy, Edwin Rios. So actually, I want to add him to my lookup later because based on like his small sample size, limited path to playing time at this point, he's not someone who's going to be maybe even in the top 150 rankings, but he's someone I want to keep an eye on because look at his stats. First of all, he's got a ton of raw power. Overall prospect value is a little low. That's based on low speed, fielding about average. But look at what he has done. If we look at some of these stats, his WOBA, 385. Now again, he only had 83 plate appearances, so his on-base percentage of 338 and 139 career plate appearances isn't quite stable or predictive yet. But we know that he has a lot of power, so he's someone I want to keep an eye on for now. And I think he's actually going to show up when we kind of filter through ISO, which we'll talk about. Okay, so weighted Weighted runs above average is going to be similar because it's going to use WOBA in its calculation. It's going to be similar to the weighted runs created. Uh, it is league adjusted, um, represents offensive ability. So, it's just another tool to use in conjunction with everything else that we've talked about. So there's this offense stat, which I personally don't have a lot of experience with. I don't use very often, but things to remember, combines hitting and base running. So if you want to value both equally, you can do this. You can kind of look at their total offensive stats. So batting runs plus base running runs. And then you got these base running stats. So BSR, base running. Then you got UBR, which is ultimate base running. And then you got weighted stolen bases. So these are all things that you can use as far as value of a player's stolen base ability. But I will let you know that what I typically do, uh, as far as stolen bases, I don't, get too into it. Speed category, which kind of tells you their speed. A couple things that I like to do as far as stolen bases, if we look at their standard stats, I like to look at their stolen bases and caught stealing bases. And the reason I like to look at both of these is because, and it depends on each situation. I like to look at how many total attempts they have stealing a base and how many they got. So, like somebody who steals, let's say, um, find a good example. So, like, I don't know, someone who steals like 10, let's say 10 stolen bases and gets caught 6 times, depending on the situation, I may value that player more than someone who steals 10 stolen bases and gets caught 0 times. And it kind of goes both ways. But for me, stolen bases is all about opportunities. If they're playing on a team that's gonna allow them to be aggressive and attempt more stolen bases, I'm gonna favor that over somebody who maybe has a higher conversion percentage but doesn't go as often, if that makes sense. So like someone last year who stole a lot, Dylan Moore. Let me find out where he's at here. It's be faster. So Dylan Moore on the Seattle Mariners last year. Let's look up his stats actually. So he stole 12 bases and was caught 5 times. Okay, so he had 17 attempts last year in the shortened season. So that's like amazing. His percentage isn't maybe that great, but if that trend continues, and it looks like even in 2019 he got caught a lot of times, but he had 20 attempts. I'm gonna favor someone like him for speed over someone who's maybe gonna be guaranteed to get 10 stolen bases, but only attempts 10 times, if that makes sense. So, for speed, I like to look at that, and then I also like to look at StatCast. Um, they have like sprint speed stats. So this is all from StatCast. I think I need to upload those still, but I'll just show you real quick. Leaderboards, sprint speed. So you can just look at sprint speed, home plate to first base, competitive run. So these just tell you who's fast in the league. So if you kind of pair up people who have the speed with the base running ability and getting stolen bases, that's kind of a good combo. But somebody like Jose Ramirez, his sprint speed is not elite, but he steals a lot of bags. So you kind of got to look at the whole picture, like I keep saying. Okay, so let's go back to the glossary now. So like I said, those offensive base running stats, I don't typically look at a lot. Okay, now we're into BABIP. Okay, batting average of balls in play. So you may have heard about this, like, oh, BABIP, they're due for regression, or they're due to kind of improve. Okay, it's tricky. So they say league average is about 300, but what you need to consider is not where they're at in the season, and make sure the sample size is good too. So it's not necessarily a sign of luck. Okay, so this is how BABIP works. Basically, they say league average is around 300. So if someone has a batting average of the balls that they put in play of like 350, the convention is that, oh, well, they're due for regression. They're going to slow down a bit because it's got to come to the mean about 300. But that's not always true. So, like, let's look at Juan Soto, for example. So his BABIP last year, 363, 338, 312. His career total, though, and that's over 1,300 plate appearances, is 329. So that's definitely above average. But I don't necessarily think that means that he's going to go down to 300 anytime in his career. And that's going to be based on a couple of things. One is going to be, how hard they hit the ball. If they hit the ball harder, it's more likely that the ball is going to fall down for a hit. Like Mike Trout is a perfect example of this. Look at his BABIP, mid 300s, high 300s. The past 2 years, he's been right around what we consider league average. So what does that mean to us? I mean, it could mean two things. One is that, he's due to produce more and get closer to his career average, which is 346, unless you can look at his profile and see reasons why maybe his BABIP has dropped in the past year and a half. And that could be due to maybe hitting the ball softer, which for him I don't think is a thing, because last year he hit the ball 93.7 miles per hour on average, which is amazing. He's barreling the ball up. His hard hit percentage is where it's always been. So I don't think that that's the issue. Another thing you can look at is how teams are playing him defensively. And, I won't dig into all of those stats right now, but you can kind of look up through Fangraphs, through StatCast, as far as defensive shifts on players. And I don't know if that's necessarily true in his case, but if you can kind of find a reason for why some of the stats aren't close to their career numbers, then you can say, well, maybe that's the reason his BABIP is lower. But if you can't find those reasons, I think it is reasonable to expect that his BABIP would, come up in the 2021 season. So he'll have a higher batting average, higher on base percentage than he's already had, which is going to make him, an even more fantastic player. So that's something to consider with BABIP. And so a long run ceiling on a player's BABIP is about 380, as no player with more than 4,000 plate appearances have a higher career BABIP than that. So that's really like the top end. 350 is more realistic mark for the best hitters over their career. Okay, so you kind of know that they're going to trend towards those numbers. It requires a large sample size. Okay, so if they start the season off and they have, a 450 BABIP, you can maybe assume that they're not going to maintain that. A perfect example of this is Fernando Tatis Jr. His rookie season, his BABIP was 410. And that was over a decent amount. It was a half a season. But, going into the 2020 season, I was not as high on Fernando as some of the other, people doing ranks were. And the big reason for me was this, I thought, unsustainable BABIP and unsustainable home run to fly ball rate, which we'll talk about later. But, his BABIP did go down. His batting average went down, but his on-base percentage stayed up. Why is that? He walked more, struck out less. His slugging was about the same. His WOBA was about the same. So even with that regression in BABIP, he's still a very, very productive hitter. So that's something good to know for him. Okay, so BABIP, you can kind of get lost in that. It's very useful for pitching as well, but make sure you have a good sample size. ISO. ISO is a stat that I use with my league a lot because it's a measure of a hitter's raw power. And power, for me, is something significant for OPS leagues. So basically, these are the ISO numbers. It takes a long time for ISO to have predictive power value going forward. Sample size of at least 550 plate appearances, not park adjusted. So if we just look at the leaders of ISO from last year, Juan Soto, Luke Voigt, Ronaldo Acuna. So these are the superstars again, right? Now, if we do it not for qualify, but if we do like 10 minimum plate appearances, I think this is where I got it from. So this is where Edwin Rios showed up. Small sample size. And remember, what did we just say? ISO takes 550 plate appearances to stabilize. So for him, ISO, he had a very respectable number even the year prior, but he only has 139 plate appearances. So he's someone that you watch, you kind of wait and watch and see how they perform going forward, but you keep them on your radar because he has that power tool set, right? And I think if we look, I think Randy Arozarena is going to be probably similar as far as ISO. Yeah, so his career ISO 320, which is a very, very solid number, but again, small sample size. So those are things you gotta consider. Um, so that's just a stat that I like to use, and you feel free to read through these because there's a lot of good information, not just in the summary at the end, but how to use it, why to use it. I would highly recommend it. Okay, so ISO, home run to fly ball rate. So this is important for both hitters and for pitchers, but we're looking at the offensive perspective now. Um, so this ratio, this percentage is similar to BABIP, where if it's too high, you might predict that it's going to fall down, and if it's too low, you might predict positive progression in their um, home run stats. So different parks have different home run to fly ball rates. So like Petco is not hitter friendly. Players who play there typically their home run to fly ball rate should be lower than typical. Use the stat in conjunction with other stats. Home runs also come off line drives, right? So some players like Stanton on the Yankees, he's going to hit a home run on line drives. This is not a factor for that. This is only for fly balls. Okay. It's more important for pitchers than hitters, which is true, but I like to look at it. So I'll give you an example. If we look at Jose Altuve, from his 2019 season to this past season, because going into last year, I was not high on him because look at this. He had 31 home runs in 2019, but look at his home run to fly ball rate. His home run to fly ball rate was 23%. His career average, including that and including this past year, is 9.6%. So for him, his 23%, I felt strongly was not sustainable and that he would regress, and he did. He went back to his mean, okay? Not to the league average mean, but his mean. But if you get somebody who really, really bops it, like, I don't know, we can just look at Aaron Judge, I guess. I'm assuming his is going to be fairly high and stable. If you look at his home run to fly ball rate, look at this. His career average is 30%, which is ridiculous. So what you do for a player like Aaron Judge is you look at this, and then you look at batting ball profile. You look at his fly ball percentage. Did I skip it? Fly ball. No, here it is. Turn next to it. You know, if he's going to hit the ball 35–40% of the time in the air, and 30% of those are going to be home runs, you know he's going to hit a lot of home runs. So, you know, that's kind of how you would use the home run to fly ball rate. You have to use it compared to their career average. Same with BABIP. You got to use it compared to their career average as long as they have a large enough sample size. And again, make sure you're factoring in what parks they're playing in, what their home field is. That's all very important. So speed isn't really a stat that I use a lot. Pull, center, and oppo also are not stats for a season-long league that I'm going to use a lot. It may be more important if you play like a daily league where you're looking at matchups and kind of like tendencies of pitchers and the hitters, but soft, medium, hard percentage I do use a lot. You want to maximize hard hit percentage, minimize soft percentage. Same thing with the plate batting ball percentage. You want more fly balls, line drives, less ground balls for hitters typically. Opposite's true for pitchers. K percentage and walk percentage are very important. You want to minimize Ks, maximize walks. That's going to be reflected a bit in other stats like your WOBA, your on base, your OPS. If you walk more, those numbers are going to be higher. This is one that I use a lot. Plate discipline. We'll go through this one. As far as swing percentage and contact percentage. So out of zone swing is the number of times you swing at pitches outside of the zone when the pitches are outside of the zone. When the pitches are inside of the zone, what percentage do you swing at, and then total. And then contact is when the pitch is outside of the zone and you swing, how often do you make contact? So those are important. And then zone. Zone contact is one that I use a lot. I tend to favor that because that's what that indicates to me is that the pitch is in the zone and you like it enough to swing, and are you making contact, right? So I use that a lot. So like when you get a pitch to hit, are you hitting it? For me, that's very important. And what the zone contact rate, 87% is considered, very, very good. Now, if we look at last year's stats, oh, I'm on plate discipline. So look at the plate discipline for last year. So if we filter this by 87% for zone contact, how many names are going to pop up? Like a decent amount, right? So these are people who are going to put the bat on the ball. And this, again, you use it in conjunction with everything else. It's going to be reflected in most likely a lower strikeout rate, right? And if they have a good BABIP to go along with high contact, that's a recipe for success because that means their batting average is going to be high, their on-base percentage is going to be high. You can see some of the best players are going to have that high contact rate. So this is another thing that I like to filter by. And if you compare this high contact rate with a high hard hit percentage, so let's see. So if we get greater than like a 40% hard hit, which is very, very good, how many players? Not many. So Mookie Betts, Mike Trout, Juan Soto, Anthony Rendon, these are some of the best hitters in the league last year. I mean, this is just last year's stats. But then you get a little further down and you say, I don't know some of these names. And that's kind of how you can find some players too. You look at stats that you like, and make sure that their sample size is good. Like these aren't, but Eric Hosmer, Alex Dickerson had a good season last season. Um, so again, what you need to do though is when you're looking at these contact rates, make sure you have a good sample size. You know, look at their career number versus what they did in the prior season. Kind of look at their trends. And Mookie Betts, it's always going to be elite, super high. Michael Brantley on the Astros, his contact rate is insane as well. So you know that they're going to be good hitters. They're going to give you a lot of value. There is no ideal plate discipline arrangement, but like I said, I favor high zone contact overall. What else do we got? So then pitch type, kind of how batters perform against certain pitches. You know, again, this is not something that I value highly as far as season long fantasy leagues. If you play in dailies, you can look at matchups. You know, if the pitcher has a really good slider, you might want to see how the hitter typically will perform against a pitcher like that. So you can look at some of the stats like that. But basically, you know, that's it as far as offensive stats. A couple other things on Statcast, you know, and I have this in my spreadsheet as well. But I look at average exit velo. I like people who have over 90 miles per hour for that. I like on average having a higher launch angle because that's going to contribute to the fly balls, the home run, the fly ball rate. You match up a high exit velo with a higher launch angle. Usually that's going to mean more home runs. And then barrels, you know, what percentage are they hit when they hit the ball? They hit the ball well. So you see, you got the typical good hitters: Seager, Tatis, Soto. You got people like Hernandez who had a great season last year. So you got to maybe look at him a little closer, you know. And I like looking at these lists to see where players are at. There are some other stats, so like this home run stat on Baseball Savant is interesting. They only have stats from the past 2 years, but they kind of give you an expected home run. But it is do note that it includes postseason stats as well, so which I don't actually like. I wish that it showed us just the regular season stats, but you can kind of see players who overperform, underperform as far as home runs. They're no doubters. People with a higher no doubter percentage are people who are going to be hitting more home runs, right? So if we say at least 10 home runs last year and we filter by the no doubters, these are the players who are going to be, giving you good home runs, and it could be based on where they play because they're not factored for weather, environment, park factors. So keep that in mind as well. I just thought it's a little kind of an interesting stat to look at. And that's as far as offensive stats. That's basically it. So what we'll do is we'll jump in the next video and start our ranks. We'll kind of start at the top. Some of the usually highly ranked offensive players. I'll try to get maybe through about 5 hitters per video. We'll kind of go head to head and rank them as we go, based on a lot of the stats that we talked about in this video. And like I said, I don't know how far down we'll get, maybe top 150, maybe more. And then, after spending a month or two going through the hitters, we'll kind of switch over to pitchers and get through those ranks as well. But we'll save that for a later date. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you at the next video.